Spoiler alert, it is wine. Hi friends, and welcome to my channel. I'm really excited about today's video. We're going to talk about the Sword of Kaigen, and I'm going to do a full review of it. So first, let's talk a little bit about what the Sword of Kaigen is about. The Sword of Kaigen is a military fantasy inspired by Japanese culture. The story takes place on a peninsula of the Kaigen Empire. In the mountainside village of Takayubi lived the Matsuda family, a noble house of warriors. Mamoru, the oldest son of Takeru Matsuda, has been training his entire life to follow in his father's footsteps as one who could summon a sword made of ice strong enough to cut through hardened steel, known as the Whispering Blade. He alone, with other warriors of Takayubi, are known as the Sword of Kaigen, for their ancestors' defeat of an invading army nearly a century earlier. At 14 years old, Mamoru meets an outsider who makes him question his destiny and forces him to confront the idea that the emperor has been lying to the people of his village about their true history. Meanwhile, his mother has a secret past, one that she has been forced to bury when she married into the Matsuda family. For 15 years, Misaki has been a loyal and dutiful housewife against her nature in order to adhere to the customs of Takayubi. In this small village, so different than her city home, Misaki is expected to remain subservient to the adult males in the family. When Misaki receives information that an old enemy plans to invade Kaigen, she will have to resurrect her past self to fight against both friend and foe for the future of her sons. So I read this book in April, and so far it is the best fantasy novel that I've read this year. And it probably will become one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. I want to read it a second time first before I can determine that, but I honestly think it was amazing. My initial thoughts are this. The book is character driven. Although there is some action in it, it is first and foremost a character driven novel, despite the fact that it is considered military fantasy. That does not mean that this book doesn't have a lot of plot or that it's slow. As a matter of fact, the pacing was very good, but it is unique as you follow the characters going into battle, days before they go into battle, and the aftermath. There are intense scenes that are action-packed, but there are also moments that are excruciatingly emotional and deep. I gave this book 5 stars. First, I would like to talk about the world building. The world building in the story was really well done, but it is very small in scope. Although there is a big world that is introduced throughout the story, most of the story takes place in Takayubi, but there were some inconsistencies with how it was established that I had some issues with. The first thing that I had a problem with was the way the history was told, was very expositional, or info dumping, if you will. You receive the history of the people in Takayubi from a lecture from Mamoru's professor. And then you receive a similar info dump from Misaki's professor as a backflash from her life in another city. I think that this was done for a purpose because the two histories contradict each other, and it kind of drives the plot forward where Mamoru has to figure out what is true about the history of his people. But it still felt really hard to absorb, not just in the matter that it was given, but because the way it was written was that obviously the receiver of the information, in both cases Mamoru and Misaki, were expected to know something of their history already. So a lot of the names and things, the country names, the names of the people, were all very hard to absorb. And so I had to reference the glossary. I think I read both of those pieces of history over several times and had to go back and forth into the glossary to really capture what it was that I was being told. And that really pulled me out of the story. But this is a very small piece of the story, a very small part of it. So I couldn't really, I'm not going to take off any points for that. It was just something that I didn't really enjoy about it. But one of the things about the world building that I loved my favorite thing about the world is the magic system. Now, I know that elemental magic is common in other fantasy. For example, The Last Airbender is reminiscent of this magic system. However, I have no experience with that story, and so this was the first like real hard adult fantasy that had this magic system, or this kind of elemental magic, and I loved it. And it really had a lot of questions going into it as to how that would be used and how the writer would use it, especially because in this story magic is used as a defense and a offensive fighting style. So the characters do use weapons and martial arts, but they use that in conjunction with their magic. And so it was very interesting to see how the author portrayed how those different elemental magics were used in both the defensive mode and how they used it in an offensive way. And I think I enjoyed that most about the world building, because it's not just the people of Takayubi that you're following and the type of magic they have, but you also are introduced to other races within this world who carry a different type of elemental magic. You have fire, you have wind, you have strength, and there's even some blood magic, which is really cool too. And I think that really set this book apart from other fantasy, because the magic system was very internal, as in the magic was part of the person, and almost kind of like their soul, their emotions is how the magic was driven, and they had to have control of a lot of things within themselves in order to be well versed in the magic that they have. And I really liked that about the world building. So that by far overshadowed any negatives that I had with the info dumping and the exposition of the history, and any parts of the story that of the world that I did feel a little bit left behind or were a little confusing. Like I said, I had to look at the map and and reference the glossary several times in order to really understand the history and to picture the world that we're in. But the village that the story takes place was very well drawn out. You understand who everybody is, you understand the culture, the people, and how everybody works within this community. And the magic, you're given a lot of information about all of those things. So by far that overshadows any negatives that I may have had with it. So if I were to rate just world building alone, I would give it 4.5 stars. The next topic I want to talk about is the writing style. Emma Wong writes beautifully. There was no issue with the way that she wrote. The dialogue was done really well. I really enjoyed the descriptions, and the way that she developed the characters was all done really well. But there were a couple of things that really irked me a little bit about her writing style. And the first thing I want to talk about is the terminology. So I fully expected there to be some foreign words in here, even some made up foreign words. What I didn't really enjoy was how some of these words were put in here to replace words that are commonplace English words. If you're going to have the character speaking in common English, it didn't make sense to have foreign words in there for things that are commonplace. For example, she replaced words like second, minute, day, and hour for other words, which really made it difficult when you're reading dialogue and the people are talking about that. It made it difficult to understand what they were saying. And then you had to kind of go back and look and reference the dialogue again in order to put context into it and define the word yourself, because I don't believe it is actually in the glossary. So there were times where that happened. Now, of course, there were words that were defined for things that don't exist in our common world today. And so those things I expected. But every once in a while, she would put in these other words that just kind of broke the consistency of the storytelling. And it was something that happened enough that I noticed it, I made note of it, and it is, unfortunately, something I didn't really like about her writing style. The other issue that I had with her writing was actually just the ending. And this is not a technical issue that I had, it was just the way that it was put together. The ending felt abrupt and without a conclusion, and I'll explain. When I say abrupt, it's not that the story just ended, page the end, and you close the book. It was more like it came to a natural ending, and then it extended past that. And it just didn't feel like the information that you got past that natural point really added to the story. But that natural ending, there was no real conclusion. So, and it's hard to explain without giving away spoilers, but you come to a point where you're like, okay, I feel confident that this is a good, where the story should end. I should be receiving a conclusion any minute now. And then you were given a whole bunch of information that was unrelated to the story in order to almost tease the other books in a companion series that the author had written. And although it did make me excited to want to read the other books, and I'm sure that was her intention, it just didn't feel like it felt disjointed, like it didn't belong there. I would have enjoyed it more if that was brought into the story earlier on so that the story could have concluded with the, but it was something that I didn't like. It was one of the things about the way she wrote the book that I didn't enjoy. But by far, like the other negatives that I've already talked about, this was not a major issue. It wasn't anything that really made me not enjoy the book as a whole. It was just some things that I noticed, and I wanted to share those ideas with you. As far as the writing style is concerned, again, I'd give the overall writing style, if I just rated the writing style by itself, a 4.5 stars. The last thing I want to talk about is character development, and this is the true strength of this book. The characters in the story were amazing, and their arc throughout the book was so good. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. But the first thing I want to talk about is the female protagonist. This was my favorite part of the book. The female protagonist, Misaki, is a mother, and the theme of being a mother is consistent throughout the book. It really comes up a lot. It comes up with Mamoru's point of view as he goes to his mother and he receives information, and there's a connection that he gets there in when he goes to her. And there's also Misaki is driven. Her character is driven throughout the book because of her being a mother, and it's so unique to fantasy. You do not see female protagonists who are mothers in fantasy, who are main characters, who you're reading the book from their point of view. At least I can't say I've ever read any other than this one. And if you know of any other books that have this type of character who is a main character, please put it in the comments below and let me know, because I would love to read more books like this. But one of the other things that I liked about Misaki was that she was a strong female protagonist, but strong without being superhuman. And I know that's strange because if I will say in the book, you know this, that all the people of the noble class have magic. So she is essentially superhuman because she has magic. But what I mean is that her magic doesn't make her so powerful that she can overcome all of her weaknesses because of it. Or she doesn't have this personality that has no weaknesses, that she's just strong and everything she does she's amazing at. She has weaknesses, but because she works so hard to overcome them, and that she works so hard to be what people expect of her, and in the book she has to grow to really understand what that is and how being defined as one thing doesn't mean she can't be something else. That made her so much stronger than any superhuman magical powers that she had, and that's what I loved most about her character, and how well that Elmo Wong wrote her in order to really give the female reader somebody to look at and to somebody to represent them without thinking, oh, I can never be this person because all she is her magic, all she is her superpowers. But Misaki was not that. She was so much more, and I really related to her a lot. I wish I had all of the magic that she had, but I will say that I have the strength that she had, and I feel like now I've seen that represented in a fantasy book. And I have to say, Elmo Wong did a great job in bringing that kind of character to fantasy, and I hope to see many, many more characters like this in the future. But the other characters in this book by no means had little to no growth. They all grew throughout the book, and I want to talk a little bit about three characters that probably you follow throughout the book, even though one of them doesn't really have his own point of view. Mamoru, like I said in the summaries, 14-year-old boy who is really going through a transition in his life. He's becoming a man. So it's more of a coming of age story, but what's unique about it is that this book takes place in a very short period of time. So the growth that he experiences throughout that is accelerated by the circumstances in the story. And it was really neat. This is by no means unique to this book, but what was really neat about it was that he went through all of these different emotions and had to rely on his family, his mother, his father, to help him through that. And that's one of the things that is unique in fantasy, is often you have in a coming of age story in fantasy the child who has to seek a mentor outside of his own family, or he doesn't have family left and he has to learn things on the road and teach himself and grow in that way. But instead Mamoru grew because he had mentors in his own family, and they weren't always the best mentors, as so many parents, we all know as parents or having had parents, that we all fall short. But it was really neat to see him kind of grow based on and relying on his family to help him with these struggles that he had. And I really, really liked that. One of the things about Misaki, other than all the things I've already talked about, is that her growth was more like a metamorphosis. I describe it more like she's the caterpillar at the beginning of the story, and all the things that make a beautiful butterfly already exist there inside her. And the story kind of creates this cocoon where she can now change and change into and emerge as the beautiful butterfly that she had always been. And without giving you spoilers, I can't really say why this happens, but I really do think that that is a good analogy for her character growth and the character arc that she goes through throughout the book. And it was beautiful. It was great to see her arc and her growth throughout the few days that happened during the book. The last character I want to talk about was Takuru, which is the husband of Misaki and Mamoru's father. What is unique about his character growth is I can't really say that his character grew as much as the other two, but the reason why is because you actually receive his story in his character through the perspective of his wife and his son. And until later in the story, you don't really know anything about what he's thinking. You're only seeing how he is as a husband and how he is as a father. And so his character changes as you start to get more, I don't want to say more inside of his head, but as you get to know him more in the aftermath of the battles. And like, again, without giving spoilers, I can't say more, but it was really incredible. And I really liked how Emma Wong didn't dismiss his character as being, a misogynist, or, because he's a father, he doesn't, and his culture doesn't require him to be involved in the rearing of his kids. And he was really a product of his culture, of the generations that came before him. And I really liked that she kind of twisted that a little bit in the book, and kind of showed you that just because somebody acts a certain way on the outside doesn't mean that that's how they feel on the inside. And so his growth was really more like turning him inside out. So you see who he is on the outside and who he is as in the perspective of the people around him, but then he's turned inside out, and you get a little bit of a glimpse at who he is inside himself. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about. This, of course, is my favorite part of the book, this character development. The magic system and the world building was excellent as well. The battle scenes were phenomenal. I mean, the way that she wrote how they used the magic to battle against the enemies that were coming, and you were on the edge of your seat the entire time. It was no holds bar. And that is only a portion of the book. It really is. And the story is really about the characters and how war and battles really affect us. And I can't really say enough great things about this. I gave it 5 stars. I really loved it. I do want to talk a little bit about spoilers at the end of this video, so please stay tuned for that. But for character development, if I were going to rate this book on character development alone, I would give it 5 stars plus 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 plus. In summary, I loved this book. It was amazing. It was a 5-star book. And I really hope that this review has convinced you to read it. For those of you who have already read it, stick around and we'll talk about spoilers. For the rest of you, let me know in the comments below if I've convinced you to pick this up. And goodbye! You're still here? You must really want to hear some spoilers. Let's get to it. Okay, we're going to talk about spoilers, because if I don't talk to you guys about it, I don't know who I will. So for the first thing I want to talk about, okay, if you guys read this book, you know what I'm talking about. What the heck? Halfway through this book, Mamoru dies? Like, seriously? How many of you saw that coming? Because I didn't. Even after it happened, I kept reading and I'm like, okay, they're gonna save him. They're gonna find some way to bring him back. You know, somebody else is gonna have some kind of secret magic and they'll be like, oh, put his guts back in, he'll be fine. I'm serious. I really thought that somehow he was gonna get saved. I just didn't expect an author to kill off a POV character halfway through. But once I got further along, I understood why. Because it was a necessary event to happen in the story in order for you to get the character growth and development that you get for his mother and father. And oh my God, was so beautiful. So I did put some flags in here, and I want to talk about some of my favorite moments in the book. So the first thing, some of these quotes are just so great. Let's look at this. Okay, so one of the things is when you first find out that about Misaki's her past, and when she was that crime fighter. Oh, I thought that was such a cool twist, because I knew that she had, you know, obviously she had a past. She was a fighter somewhere. I think even in the back of the book it talks about that she had been to a fighting academy and that she had learned all these things. But the last thing I expected was to literally be some superhero like Batman running around some city and taking down bad guys with a group of friends. So when she realizes that the Ranganese are coming and that she's going to have to protect her family, and because all the men have literally left to go to the front lines, there's a line here where she's looking at the sword in the floor and she says, "Forgotten." She had tried to tell herself it was forgotten, along with everything from her life before, but the little blade had never left her mind or her heart. Her hands found the weapon as easily as if she had put it there yesterday. And I thought, you know, obviously this is halfway through the book, so you don't yet have the rest of her character development, but you do know that she struggled a lot with being a mom. Not so much motherhood as being a mom to these strong, powerful men. I think that she really had been given such a poor, I don't know, I think really a lot of it comes down to Takeru, that his reception of her as his bride was very cold, and you know, you learn later on that he does this because he's obviously emotionally screwed up. But he's kind of made her, he's made her in such a way that she feels like his power has made him that way. And he literally is physically cold. And so when she gets close to her children and she feels that coldness, it just reminds her that they're going to grow up just like their father. And so she's very standoffish with them. And it's really sad that she struggles. You could tell that she loves her children. But at some point, she also feels like there's two sides of that coin, right? That her job as their mother is to raise them up to a certain point, and then they'll become these cold fighting warriors, and she no longer has control over the men that they will turn into. And I really thought that was an amazing part to her character, because I think a lot of mothers really struggle when their kids are young, and knowing we try so hard to create young women and young men that will do good in our life. And as women today in our modern culture, we have the ability and the control to do what we can to ensure that to a certain extent. But she doesn't. She knows that they're going to grow up to be a certain kind of man, and that she has no control in who he will be. That it is her husband's responsibility to make him into a warrior and to harden him, and that as a woman and a mother, she can only nurture him and turn him into something to a certain extent, and then I'm rambling here, but I can't say enough about how much I really liked her character. But this part where she picks up her sword, I think it really was a flipping point for her character, where she was like, you know what? Yeah, I've had to bury that life. I've been told that I can never talk about it. And in essence, she doesn't see that as something that has made her who she is. She actually sees it as something that has contaminated her. That the person that she was then is something that she should never be again. And so at this point, she's now seeing a way to merge those two lives together, that she can be a mother and a fighter, and that the two don't have to be exclusive. So I really liked that point right there. I thought that was a really good transition point for her character. I also like Sasuke. Or Sasuko. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing these words right. I'm not really good with the pronunciation. I should have listened to the audiobook. But I really liked her character. I mean, to go from being a poor fisherman daughter to the wife of the clan leader had to be a huge culture shock for her. But she just rolls with it. Her character is just so funny. She's always just such in a good mood, and she's kind of the catalyst that holds that group of women together. I really do believe, you've got 3 different personalities, but Sasuke's the one that kind of is the motherly person in that group, which is funny because I think she's younger than Misaki, if I remember correctly, or I could be wrong. It might be the opposite, but anyway. There's a line here where Misaki knows that she's going to have to fight. She knows that she's kind of a dirty fighter, and she doesn't want Satsuka to see her fight, so she's trying to send her back to the basement with the other kids. And so here she says, after Misaki sent Satsuka back, she turns to face the threat. She might not be worthy of belonging to this family, but she was going to protect it with every bit of venom and bloodlust and underhanded trickery in her. And I thought, you know what? Any person would be like, whatever I have to do to save my children, or to save my own life if you don't have children. I think it really says a lot about the culture that this story is supposed to be inspired by, that it was dishonorable to fight in a certain way, and that was the way that Misaki had been taught, is the whatever I have to do to survive in the city streets. And now that she's in a family, a noble family, where she's been told for 15 years as she sees her children being trained that this is the noble way to fight. You don't stab somebody in the back. You fight man on man, mano a mano. For her to think that her fighting is underhanded trickery, it really was an insight into who she was. But to be honest, this is what I loved about her character, because these are the things that she had to do to be strong, right? She knew she was smaller, she knew she was lighter, that she wasn't as strong as the men that she was fighting against, and she knew that her magic ability was also limited, and so she had to do whatever she had to do to survive. So her strengths weren't, that she was superhuman, could throw down a man, get punched in the face and just shake it off. And those things are so unrealistic. We see it in movies all the time. We see women get thrown around in movies and they just get up, they wipe the little bit of blood on the corner of the lip, and then they go back and punch again. It's like, no. Sweetheart, if you get hit by a man in your stomach like that, you're down, and you're down for a while, and you won't be able to take a breath. And that little blood in your lip, no, that means you have internal bleeding. So I really liked how her character was written in here. It was more realistic, and I think that a lot of women will relate to her because of that. So I'm rambling again. Let's keep going. So the next thing I want to talk about. Okay, so this is the moment where Mamoru realized, or you realize that Mamoru is going to die. But then again, I told you I wouldn't believe it. It took a while for me to. Honestly, it took until they were burying him, or where you had his funeral pyre, that I was like, okay, I guess he's not coming back. But this line right here is, a decade later, a 15-year-old Hiroshi would become known as the youngest swordman ever to master the Whispering Blade. What the world would never know was that he was the second youngest. And of course that's because Mamoru ends up summoning the blade and killing the person, the Dragon Eater, I think is what he calls him. But he'd already been, mortally wounded, and he ends up dying anyway. I loved that scene. It was so heart-wrenching, but it was such a beautiful transition for his character that that even though it comes to the end of his life, it culminates in him actually achieving the thing that he'd tried so hard and was unable to achieve. And I really do believe that the moment that he had with his mom where they're fighting, even though she's not supposed to teach him anything, I love how in the story that he remembers that as he's fighting, and he's remembering the lessons. Even though it was one time the two of them bonded, he's remembering that, and that I do believe that those things are what helped him get to this point, that he, instead of him thinking that the things that she taught him when he was a boy, that his grandfather and his father had been telling him that her magic, the magic that she taught him to use, was actually making his ice blade unclean, and so that's why it wasn't worthy of the Whispering Blade. But he does it anyway, and I just love that they did that, because if she very easily could have said, okay, he didn't do it, but here he's dead, but she didn't. And I really, really liked that. So the next few things I want to talk about is when Misaki finally confronts Takeru. When she finally realizes that Mamoru's spirit will not be able to rest, and it's not because Takeru didn't pray over his son. It was because she was harboring this hate for him. And I think that she always knew it was there, but she kept thinking, or she believed that, she could keep that in her because it was in her, and that she had spoken everything that Mamoru needed to move on. But honestly, that anger and hate that she had for her husband inside her was what was really keeping Mamoru from settling. And so she finally decides to send him, Takeru, the letter, anonymously, calling him out for a duel. And let me see. Oh wait, first this is the moment where she's praying over his the mass grave. And again, like I was saying earlier about how they had this bonding moment. For his 14 years, she kind of kept him at arm's length because she felt that was her duty to make sure he grew up into a strong man, and so her nurturing him had to have limits. And one of the things that she never was allowed to talk about to anybody was about her past. And so when he comes to her and asks her about it, it made her happy. And so she says here, "It made me so happy to hear you ask that. I was looking to hear you ask that." So she's saying, when you came to me that morning and you asked me for help, she said, "And I was so looking forward to telling you those stories. They were going to be fun, adventure stories. I'm sure you would have liked them, but now I think maybe those stories about Susanoo Misaki, Sirawu, what is the name of her sword? That was the name of her her crime fighter name, the Shadow. That those stories didn't have as much value as I put on them." And so this is the moment where she's kind of realizing that her past, she really had a lot of regrets about that, right? She kept looking on those moments in her life as a better time, because that was when she was able to be herself, to not be under the thumb of the men in her family. But this is when she realizes that regret, that those things don't have to be separate. She could still be that person and be the person that she is today. They don't have to be separate. And that looking back on it and romantically actually gave that past more power over her and gave her even more regrets. And so she's realizing now that she doesn't, that they had more value than she really thought they did. or that they didn't have as much power, value as she thought they did. And she says, maybe they weren't worth retelling or holding on to the way I did. Oh, just, again, shows great character growth, because I think that a lot of times we as people, not even just women, that we separate experiences that we have in our lives as before, as the before us, and this is the now us, the present us. And a lot of times, or almost always, those times before made us who we are today. They're a part of us. They don't have to be separate from us. They don't have to be something that we regret. They don't have to be something that we romanticize and we miss. They're still a part of us. They're still there, and there's nothing you can do to go back and change that. And so this was another really good, realistic way of making Misaki a more human, more of a real character, and help bring her out of the story and put her in our heads. And honestly, I felt like I could walk through her eyes in the story, because I felt like so many things that in my life I could relate to in her story, and I just loved it. So this is where I started having issues. I loved when Misaki, calls the duel with Takiro, but it's after this that I had the problem. But first, let's talk about when she calls him for a duel. Oh, this one line when he tells her, "I will not hear any more of this woman." Takiro bellowed, as if sheer volume could silence her now. "This is your last chance to obey." And she cuts him off. And she says, You lost your right to my obedience when you stopped being a man." Misaki cut him off. "If you want me to go back to the house, you'll have to fight me. I've stood by too long while you disgraced yourself, but this is the last time you will be weak in front of me. One of us is going to rest here with our son. Draw." Oh, Misaki. So this is where you start to see the transition in Takiro. So this is when he realizes what his wife thinks of him. And so he looks back at the letter that she wrote him that brought him to there. And now that he knows it was her, he starts to see that in a whole new light. And so he says this when they're fighting. Or actually, I think this might be at the end. Yeah, this is at the end of the fight. He is looking over at her, and he says, "Flayed and boneless, he faced the creature he had awakened, this woman of God's blood and fury." And so now he sees her in a whole different light, right? Before, he expected her to be this woman, this housewife, this mother, and her role in his life was, or at least what you thought he thought were these things, that she was not a creature of God's blood and fury, that she was just his wife, and Mamura was just his son. And when he hears Misaki call him, one, that he's not acting like a man, and two, that he's failed both his wife and his children, I think that really clicks something in him, that what she thinks of him and what she's telling him don't jive with how he feels. And I think this is the moment that he realized he needs to be honest with her. And so the rest of this chapter is in his point of view, where he talks about, he finally opens up to her, and she learns more about who he is and the reasons why so many of the things that happened in the beginning of the book happened the way they did. And he's really messed up. You start to find out he's got some PTSD, and he's just doing the best he can to do best by his family in the way that he was raised. A lot of his choices are based on what he thinks he's supposed to do, not really what he wants to do. And so it all comes down to when he makes that choice, when his brother says, "Go and protect the women and children of the village," and he leaves his son behind. It's that same decision. He wanted to stay, but he was doing what he was supposed to do. And so many of the things that happen in the story where you think, man, what a jackass Takiro is, it was because he was making decisions that he felt were best, but he was so wrong. And until Misaki calls him out on it, he had no idea. He thought he was doing what he was supposed to do, and I think deep down inside he knew that he wasn't the best man that he could be, but he thought he was doing the things that he was doing was what was best for everybody, and that's where I think that his character arc really culminates, right? You get, honestly, through the first 3/4 of the book, I hated the guy. I was like, why did his brother have to die? I'm like, what a jerk. And also when you learn, the things that Misaki had to give up to be his wife, and then he's such a jerk to her, and that she honestly, when Robin comes to her and she had the opportunity to leave, and she still stays, even though she knows this guy is just not the guy for me. He's cold. Anyway. But in just switching that point of view, and now you are inside his head and you know what his heart is and what he is struggling with, Emma Wang totally changes your idea. I mean, honestly, like flipping a switch. I was like, oh, okay. Well, he's not so bad anymore. He's got some issues. He's got some making up to do, but I understand him now. And I think that is one example of the many things that happen in this book that I did not expect to happen. And so the last thing I want to talk about is the ending. So y'all, I didn't like the ending. And the main reason why is, as I said in my review portion of this, I felt like there was a natural point in which the story could have ended if she had kind of wrapped things up. But then when Robin gets there and he brings his son and there's all this, I mean, I honestly was just like, okay, is anything more going to happen, or can I just stop reading? Because I feel like I feel like everything I'm going to get, I've already gotten. And I understand why she did it, because I think she wanted to kind of get people to want to read the other books that were written before this, or maybe because this was written after, this was her way of trying to tie those things together so that fans of the previous books would have some satisfaction into understanding the prequel. I mean, it's a true prequel, because I believe the other books are about Daniel, Robin's son. And so I can understand why it was there, but I think it would have been better if it had been earlier in the story, so you could have ended the story with Misaki and Takeru and their understanding of each other, and that I felt was the true conclusion of the story. But I also felt like you didn't get anything about, so what's going on with the Emperor, and why did he do what he's doing, and why did the Ranganese just all of a sudden decide, okay, we're not going to fight these people anymore? I mean, I know that you got some answers from Misaki's brother when he comes, because it's like, okay, well, if the Ranganese think that they were all destroyed and that there were no casualties for the Kaigenese, then they'll be afraid and they won't do it again. But it's like, that just doesn't seem realistic to me, and I really wanted more from that. I wanted more explanation. It just felt too easy. And I know that also might be because of my understanding of the history, because the history was really the same thing, right? They came, they invaded the Kaigenese supposedly without any help, destroyed them, and sent them running, and that's the reason why you find out that the history has been so wrong. And so I saw it was coming full circle, that the Emperor didn't learn his lessons the first time, but I just didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel like that part of the story was really, I got enough from it. I don't know if some of these questions are answered in the other books, but that was the ending. I just really wished it had been better, but I could not give this book less than 5 stars. I really couldn't, because it was just amazing. When I was preparing for this review, I went back to look at some of those quotes and things that I really liked about it, and it just made me want to reread the whole book again. And so I can't say any. There's not a lot of bad things about it. There were some, and I pointed them out, but mainly it was just an amazing story. So I'm going to wrap up the spoiler part. I talked for a long time, but I had to have some informal discussion with you guys. Please, if you had the same feelings that I had, or you had some different things about the story that you liked, or maybe some of the things that I talked about, you saw them differently, please give me all your insights in the comments below. Just put spoiler before the comment if you're going to have any spoilers in there. I will make sure to read them. Thank you guys for your time. I hope to see you on my channel again soon. Take care. Bye.